My name is Ariana Carter. I'm 23 years old and I just graduated with a degree in environmental engineering from Stanford. That day was supposed to be the best day of my life. The party was held on the rooftop of a luxury hotel in San Francisco. Warm golden lights shone down on tables draped in white cloth, overflowing with fresh flowers. Soft music played in the background, mingling with the sparkle of champagne glasses. I never imagined my parents would host a graduation party for me, because to them I was always the rebellious child, the one who refused to follow the family legacy, the one who didn't know how to stay in line like my sister. But when Ethan, my boyfriend, knelt down in front of the crowd, his hand trembling as he held a ring, I thought, maybe things were about to change. Maybe love could pull me out of the darkness I'd grown up in. But before he could say a word, he collapsed onto the tiled floor. The ring rolled from his hand and stopped, right beneath the bottom of the champagne glass my father had handed him. I froze, my heart shattering into pieces. If you've ever been hurt by the people who were supposed to protect you, then you know how unbearable that moment can be. Have you ever suspected that your own family might be setting a trap for you? Leave a comment if you've ever felt betrayed by your own blood. Hit like if you believe the truth is always worth uncovering. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel so we can uncover what really happened after that glass was raised. Because everything had only just begun. I still remember that moment clearly, etched into my memory like a scar. Ethan had been standing beside me for less than a minute, his hand gently holding mine, when my father raised his glass and offered a brief, formal toast. His face showed no emotion. The smile stayed on his lips but never reached his eyes. I was giving forced smiles to strangers surrounding us, mostly business partners of my parents. Then Ethan gently tugged my hand, turning me toward him. I didn't even have time to react before he was down on one knee, surrounded by flowers and glimmering crystal under the golden light. I just want you to know one thing. I believe in you. I believe in the path you chose. And I want to walk it with you. I heard a few gasps of surprise from the guests. Someone chuckled behind us. I brought a hand to my mouth, overwhelmed. Deep inside I felt warmth rising. Finally, someone saw me, not through criticism or expectations but through trust. He reached into the pocket of his blazer and took out a small black velvet box. But right then his hand began to tremble. His face turned pale. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice shaking. He swayed. His body collapsed forward. The box slipped from his hand, hitting the tile floor and popping open. The ring rolled, then stopped at my feet, right beside the champagne glass my father had handed him less than 3 minutes earlier. No one laughed anymore. No one spoke. The music cut off mid-note. "Call an ambulance," I screamed, dropping to my knees beside Ethan. He didn't respond. His breathing was so faint I had to lean close just to feel it. I lifted his head, my hands wet with spilled champagne. A strong, sharp smell hit my nose. My heart skipped a beat. "Why, that glass." My mother, Valerie, rushed over, clutching her glittering clutch bag so tightly it looked like she might crush it. "Calm down, Ariana. Maybe he just fainted. Or didn't sleep well. Don't make a scene." "It's not lack of sleep, Mom. He drank from the glass Dad gave him." I turned to my father. He was on the phone, completely calm. His eyes briefly glanced my way, as if this was nothing more than an inconvenient disruption to a perfect evening. A guest stepped forward and placed a hand on my shoulder. "I'm a doctor. Let me take a look." I stepped back, numb like I was sleepwalking. The ring still lay there at the bottom of the glass. A sliver of its gemstone shimmered through the amber liquid that remained. I stared at it, then looked up as I heard sirens echoing from the street below. Police arrived just minutes later, as per hotel protocol when a guest is hospitalized under suspected poisoning. I was asked to go with them for questioning. Valerie placed a hand on my shoulder, her smile tight and unnatural. "Stay calm. Don't say anything that'll make this worse." I brushed her hand off. "I'm going to tell the truth." The interrogation room at the police station was freezing. The young officer across from me introduced himself as Harris. No relation to me, but his eyes were all too familiar. Doubtful, guarded, and just a little bit pitying. "You said your boyfriend drank a glass of champagne given to him by your father?" I nodded. "He handed it to Ethan right before he proposed." "Do you know what was in the glass?" "I don't. But I smelled something strange." Did you drink the same champagne? No. I had my own glass but hadn't taken a sip yet. Your father claims he didn't know about the proposal, and that it was just a regular drink at the party. I looked at him, my insides freezing. Do you know who I am? He blinked. You're Ariana Carter, daughter of Raymond Carter, CEO of Carter Ecotech. Then you should also know. My father doesn't do anything without a reason. I left the station at 3 in the morning. Ethan was still in a coma, moved to the intensive care unit. I wasn't allowed to visit, only immediate family. And since I'd never been officially recognized as his fiancée, I was stopped outside the ICU. I sat on the hallway bench all night, head resting on my knees, clutching the ring that had been returned to me from the scene. Footsteps echoed nearby. Miss Carter. I looked up. A man stood there, around 50, wearing a white lab coat. I'm Dr. Calvin, overseeing Ethan's case. All I can say is this. If he hadn't been found when he could have gone into cardiac arrest. We found traces of a mild toxin in his blood, but the source is still unknown. We're waiting on toxicology. I thanked him, my voice hoarse. But in my mind, only one thought rang loud. Someone had poisoned that glass. And that glass was meant for me. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't cry. But I swore I would get to the truth no matter what it cost. Even if it meant uncovering something about the people who gave me life. I was born into a family where everything was tightly choreographed. Every step, every smile, every major decision had to serve the image. My mother, Valerie Carter, was a West Coast media icon, famous for her inspirational speeches about feminism, social responsibility, and family values. On stage, she spoke of love and sacrifice. But behind the curtain, everything was scheduled by spreadsheets and cold frowns. My father, Raymond Carter, ran Carter Ecotech, a massive industrial wastewater treatment corporation with hundreds of government contracts and flashy world-saving marketing campaigns. People called him an environmental reformer. But I knew better. He didn't care about the environment. He only cared about profit. And about who would protect that empire once he stepped away. My entire childhood passed in the shadow of televised news programs hosted by my mother, and the endless business trips my father took to major industrial zones. But what hurt more than anything was this. They didn't keep me out of things because I was too young. They simply didn't need me involved. I remember once, when I was 12, I built a water filtration model using sand and activated charcoal for the school science fair. I stayed up all night perfecting it. At dinner, I told my father about it, excited, my voice practically glowing. He gave a tight smirk and replied coldly, "You should learn how to read a financial report instead of playing with dirty sand." My mother gave a soft laugh and gently patted my shoulder like I had just told her a cute joke. Sweet girls don't need to be good at engineering. You just need to know how to show up in the right place at the right time and make people remember your name. Starting when I was 15, they began scheduling summer internships for me at the company's headquarters, forcing me into finance, accounting, and corporate law prep courses. I resisted. I once screamed that I wanted to be a researcher, that I wanted to study climate change and ecosystems. But every attempt was met with looks full of disappointment. "This family doesn't need another dreamer," my mother said once when she found out I had secretly signed up for an advanced biology course. "We need someone truly capable of taking over." To them, my role was always clear. I was the fallback plan. The one behind the curtain, never allowed to outshine the chosen one. Madison, my younger sister, was the gem they polished with care. 2 years younger than me, but ever since middle school, Madison had been the center of attention. Striking looks, a charming voice, a camera-ready smile. Everything about her seemed built to become a brand. My mother managed all her social media from day one. Every photo, every video was carefully edited, color-corrected, and hashtagged like a marketing campaign. She had millions of followers, brand endorsements, and offers to appear on television. And even though she never touched a real financial report in her life, my father still called her the family's intuitive heir. I didn't hate Madison. But I can't say it didn't hurt. Especially when she took away the first person I ever loved. Nathan, my freshman year boyfriend, was the kind of love I thought would last forever. He studied environmental science with me, kind-hearted and curious. But after spring break at the family villa, where Madison was also present, Nathan changed. He became distant. then vanished entirely without a word. 3 months later, I saw a picture of the two of them holding hands on Madison's Instagram. No explanation. No apology. When I confronted my mother, she just shrugged. "Nathan's a smart young man. You should learn how to pick your men more carefully." I didn't cry. I learned to swallow the things I couldn't say. And I started carving out my own path. I shifted my focus to independent research and earned a full scholarship to Stanford, majoring in environmental engineering with a concentration on industrial toxins and biological wastewater treatment. I worked as a research assistant, joined community projects, and spent every spare hour in the lab. Ethan came into my life at the end of sophomore year. He was a graduate research fellow who had previously worked for a water quality certification center. We met at a conference where I was presenting my first research findings. Unlike other men who saw me only through the Carter lens, Ethan saw me as a real person. He didn't ask about my family, he asked about my ideas. He listened patiently as I talked for hours about biochemical reactions and natural bacterial filtration. He believed that science could save more lives than any flashy speech ever could. When I told him I didn't want to inherit the company, he didn't laugh, didn't try to talk me out of it. He just said, "Then you'll build a better one." Ethan was the first person to put a hand on my shoulder without making me feel small. I once thought, if anyone could see and accept the real me, it would be him. And now that person was lying unconscious in a hospital bed, because he drank a glass of wine handed to him by my own father. I thought about the cold stare my mother gave me as I left the party. I thought about the indifference in my father's face while people panicked around Ethan's seizing body. I thought about Madison, who always knew when to stay silent, standing tucked behind a marble column the entire evening. I didn't want to believe it. But a fear began to grow inside me, a quiet, crawling dread that maybe I never really knew who they were at all. I sat alone in my small apartment, the soft light from my desk lamp casting shadows across the dining table, which was cluttered with documents and dried coffee stains. Outside the window, San Francisco's city lights blinked silently, cold and distant, just like my mind felt. Ethan's backpack still rested on the couch, half-zipped, like he'd only stepped out for a moment and would return any minute now. But he was still in the ICU. No words. No movement. I stared at his notebook, the one he always carried on site, to collect data, record formulas, jot down suspicions. I reached out and opened it, flipping through the familiar, tightly written pages. Then a thin yellow sheet slipped out, folded neatly in thirds, hidden between the last few pages. It was a lab report for a water sample collected from a recycling system in Fresno. The same project Carter Ecotech had proudly announced had significantly improved the local community's access to clean water. I examined every line carefully. Ethan had circled 3 numbers in red: residual organic chlorine nitrosamine levels and a compound I'd never seen before, DMC-12. Below, he'd written in blue ink, "This compound isn't on the EPA's approved checklist. No one's tracking it in current sanitation protocols. But based on the reaction chain we verified, it may cause cellular-level DNA damage." A chill ran down my spine. I remembered the night Ethan told me all of this after coming home late from fieldwork. He stood by the kitchen counter, shirt dusty, both hands pressed against the surface. "Ariana, I'm thinking of quitting the testing center. I can't keep pretending not to see what's going on. If my suspicions are right, they're skipping an entire stage of toxin filtration. And the reports still say, meet standards." I didn't speak. I didn't react. I just looked at him and my heart ached, not from the facts but from the weight I saw pressing down on his shoulders. "Why you?" I asked softly, barely above a whisper. "Why not let me face it?" Ethan was silent for a moment, then stepped closer and placed his hand gently on my shoulder. "Because I want you to do science for real without being swallowed by your family's shadows. If someone has to stand up to Raymond Carter so you can stay outside of it all, it should be me." I cried that night in his arms. Not out of fear, but because I knew then, there was no going back. Ethan wasn't just someone I loved. He was my teammate. The one who saw my loneliness long before I had words to name it. Back in junior year, we had dreamed up a project called Clear Roots, a simple but effective water treatment system using live bacteria to break down heavy metals and chlorine residues. It was designed to be installed in low-income neighborhoods. Ethan built the prototype. I wrote the proposal. We both believed that if we couldn't change the whole world, at least we could make one small corner of it safer. But to scale it, we needed funding. And since I refused to involve my father's company, we started applying for independent grants. One potential partner asked us to compare water samples from two zones, one treated by ClearRoots and one maintained by Carter Ecotech. That was when Ethan discovered the huge gap between real-world data and the company's published reports. Didn't it ever strike you as odd that they claimed to treat mold-infested water in just 1 hour without using any harsh chemicals? Ethan asked one evening, his voice calm but eyes burning. You told me once, no biological process works that fast without leaving behind residuals. You were right. We sat together, analyzing dozens of water samples, comparing them against public reports. Ethan was meticulous with every detail. He even sent a few samples to a third-party lab in Oregon for cross-checking. The answer was clear. Yes, they were using an unapproved chemical. What they called DMC-12 was, in fact, a new variant of a chlorinated compound. It worked quickly as a disinfectant but was highly reactive with organic material, creating toxic byproducts, including a type of nitrosamine that recent studies suggested could cause intestinal cancer if it built up in drinking water over time. And worse, Carter Ecotech had known about it for at least 3 years. In an internal email Ethan uncovered, there was a line from Raymond that read, EPA reports don't include DMC-12. We've got at least 2 years before they update the list. Make sure the sample numbers come out right. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I didn't want to believe it. But I couldn't keep lying to myself. My father, the man who constantly stood behind podiums preaching transparency in environmental industry, was actively directing data manipulation, endangering hundreds, possibly thousands of families, just to hold on to a contract. Ethan had planned to go public with all of it. He told me we were one legal step away from submitting our findings to an independent investigative journalism team. But before he could take that step, he collapsed after drinking a glass of wine handed to him by my father. And the most critical evidence, the USB containing all of the cross-reference data, was no longer in his backpack. I looked again at the cluttered desk in front of me, gripping his worn notebook tightly. Ethan had never been careless. He was always cautious. And if someone had realized what he was doing, was this their way of silencing him? I stood up and grabbed my keys. Only one thing filled my mind now. I had to find that data copy no matter the cost. Because Ethan had risked his life for it. And because, maybe it wasn't just a warning. Maybe they really had intended to kill me too. I returned to Stanford on a gloomy afternoon, my thin coat barely enough to keep the chill from crawling down my spine every time I thought of Ethan still unconscious. The environmental research wing was at the far end of the South Lab building. Its frosted glass walls reflected my silhouette against the silver sky. Inside, everything was quiet as usual. But somehow, I felt something had changed. Ethan's lab door was locked. I used the backup access card he had once given me to collect samples, scanned the code and pushed the door open. The familiar scent of disinfectant hit me instantly. His laptop was gone from the desk. I looked around. There were no signs of forced entry. Everything was wiped down, too clean. I opened the bottom drawer. The file shelf behind his desk had been cleared out, leaving only a few printed pages about microbial water treatment, work Ethan had already published at last year's conference. All recent experimental reports were missing. I pulled out my phone and checked the hallway's security camera feed, the same system Ethan once showed me. The screen flashed a notice. No connection. Camera under maintenance. I gasped. A creeping dread filled my chest. Something worse than I imagined was happening quietly behind my back. I left the lab and headed straight for Ethan's faculty advisor, Robert Sutherland, the man Ethan once called his second father. I had met him a few times at department defense sessions. A quiet, serious man who always seemed to believe in his students. He had been the first to help Ethan when he sought funding for the ClearRoots project. His office door was slightly ajar. I knocked gently. "Come in," he said, his voice steady and low. I stepped inside, heart pounding. "Ariana." He stood up, his eyes full of concern. "I heard what happened to Ethan. I'm so sorry. Do you know who entered his lab?" I asked directly. He paused. "I went to check the morning after it happened, but everything had already been cleared." The department chair said they were following orders from someone at the sponsoring company. Carter Ecotech? I tightened my grip on my bag. That's my father's company. He nodded slowly. I didn't want to believe it, but Ethan once told me that if anything ever happened to him, I should give you this. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small sealed envelope, placing it on the desk. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a black USB drive with a small handwritten note. Backup. Only open when you truly need it. I haven't looked at it, he said. I wanted to respect Ethan. But I think the time has come. I thanked him and immediately went to the department library, the only place I could open the files without leaving a digital trace. I entered a private computer room and inserted the USB. A folder popped up, R03 under final. Inside were a series of data files, maps, spreadsheets, and 3 video clips documenting field sample collections. I opened the first map. It was a diagram of the water treatment network in the southern part of Bakersfield, California, an area I knew well, home mostly to low-income Black and Latino families. Ethan had marked 12 waste outflow points, indicating levels of heavy metals, nitrates, and DMC-12 at each. The concentrations exceeded legal limits by 300 to 500%. One annotation nearly took my breath away. 3 samples contain nitrosamine levels 7 times the safety threshold, plus 1 unidentified compound. Long-term use may lead to cancer. The first video showed Ethan in protective gear, with a local volunteer collecting water from a pipe behind a residential area. His voice was calm, clear. We're documenting sample collection from distribution station 8. Heavy chlorine odor. For children in this zone have already developed severe skin rashes. The second clip was a side-by-side comparison with Carter Ecotech's public reports. Ethan pointed directly at the data section, explaining each discrepancy. Here they claim Station 8 meets all standards, but no real-world sample supports that. I opened the last file, an audio recording of a phone call between Ethan and someone listed as an anonymous number. "We know you're collecting information," said the low, gravelly voice of an unknown man. "If you continue, the consequences won't just be losing your job." "I'm not afraid of losing my job," Ethan replied. "What about MS? Carter? Does she know she's being dragged into this? Maybe one day, she'll be the one who pays." I stopped the playback. My heart thundered. My breath came in gasps. Ethan wasn't doing this alone. He was being watched. And someone knew how close we were. I sat frozen in the chair. A storm of questions swirled in my mind. Had Ethan been a target from the start? Was that glass of wine not a coincidence but a calculated move? And if I had taken the drink, would they have erased all evidence overnight? I looked back at the Bakersfield water map, where the underground systems showed the most severe contamination. Below it, a final line of notes. Where there are no voices, that's where they bury the bodies. I understood then that Ethan had seen what most people chose to ignore. And now it was my turn to continue. Not for justice, not for some abstract truth anymore. But for Ethan. For the children who had no idea the water they drank carried the lies of an empire. Because I carry the Carter name, but I'm not the one who will stay silent. 2 days after I found Ethan's backup USB, a brown envelope was slid under the door of the apartment I was temporarily staying in. No stamp, no return address. Just my name in slanted block letters, Ariana Carter. I sat down, my hands trembling slightly as I opened it. Inside was nothing but a single folded sheet of paper and a photograph. In the photo, Ethan and I were standing outside a residential area in Bakersfield, the day we collected samples. Ethan was smiling at a child holding a water bottle. I was turned toward him, eyes shining with trust. That moment had never been posted anywhere. It had been taken secretly. From a distance. I unfolded the paper. Red ink, messy handwriting. No greeting. No signature. "You're the next target if you keep digging." Ethan was the first warning. Don't push things too far. I sat frozen. Not just from the threat, but because it confirmed what I had suspected but hadn't dared admit out loud. Ethan hadn't been harmed by chance. And if I kept going, I might not get another chance to make things right. I locked the door, drew the curtains, and called an old attorney from the independent press protection group Ethan had once contacted. I asked them to test the ink and check the envelope for prints. Being careful was no longer optional. It was survival. About an hour later, there was a sharp knock at the door. I stepped over, looked through the peephole. It was Madison. I didn't open right away. I waited. She stood there, shoulders slightly trembling, eyes swollen and red. Not the version of her I knew. Not the little sister with thick lashes and flawless makeup, always posing perfectly for the cameras. "Ariana, please. Let me in." Madison's voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying for hours. I opened the door and blocked the way. "What do you want?" Madison looked up at me. Her tear-filled brown eyes looked hauntingly like our mother's. I don't think he was the target. I didn't speak. I quietly stepped aside and let her in. The apartment was so quiet I could hear her labored breathing as she sat down on the edge of the couch. Madison clasped her hands tightly together, red-polished nails digging slightly into her skin. "Do you remember, at the graduation party, the wine Ethan drank? It was originally meant for you?" I nodded slightly. Madison swallowed hard, then said slowly, "I think it wasn't meant for you. It was meant for me." I stared at her. "What are you talking about?" "He wasn't the only one threatening to expose our parents," Madison whispered. "I spoke up too a few weeks ago. To Mom." I sat across from her. "Why?" She pulled a thin envelope from her bag, identical to the one I'd received that morning. But inside were printed bank statements from our mother's charity, the Valerie Foundation, where she often claimed to sponsor scholarships for minority children. I skimmed through them. Suspicious transactions. Large donations from shell real estate companies, routed through offshore accounts, then returned under the guise of scholarship funds. A blatant laundering loop. I discovered it when the accountant asked me to sign an expense form for a nutrition program in Peru. But the photos were of an elementary school in southern Texas. When I questioned it, Mom got angry. Really angry. Unlike her usual self. I looked at her, still struggling to believe. "I told her I didn't want to be involved anymore," Madison continued. "That I needed to step away from public events. I said it felt wrong using children's names to launder money. And you think, Mom tried to poison you?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Did you notice? At the party I was sitting next to you. When Dad brought over the wine tray, he said my name first, then looked at you." I closed my eyes, recalling. Yes. Raymond had said, "For Madison, a special glass. And for Ariana, our unexpected pride." "I didn't drink it," Madison said softly. I set it down and switched to a different champagne already on the table. I opened my eyes. I remembered the glass being passed. Ethan arrived right then. He raised the glass, toasted with me. I hadn't even touched mine, he drank it. All of it. "I think Ethan drank the wine meant for me," Madison said, her voice breaking. "Maybe Mom meant to use me as a warning to you. Or to silence me." I didn't know what to say. My mind was spiraling. "He met with Mom," Madison added. "Not once, twice. After he got the evidence about the wastewater system. He told her to stop. Said if she didn't end the laundering and falsifying reports, he'd go public." I stood up, walked to the window, unable to look at my sister still crying on the couch. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I'm scared," Madison whispered. "Because I think, if you keep going and I stay silent, the next person won't be as lucky as Ethan. And because I don't want to be the one pretending I don't know anymore." I turned around. The girl sitting in front of me was no longer the Madison I'd known. No longer the golden child basking in stage lights and family praise. She was someone trembling in the face of truth. We had both been dragged into this. Cast into roles. But maybe, just maybe, we finally had the chance to rewrite the story. There was still time. I chose a quiet Saturday afternoon for the meeting. Not at a law office. Not at anyone's home. But in a small backroom behind the old bookstore Ethan and I used to visit every weekend. No cameras. No familiar faces. Just the soft hum of an air conditioner and the faint scent of old paper in the air. On a scratched wooden table by the window, I placed a small silver voice recorder in the center. To my left was Madison, pale-faced, clutching a notebook filled with every document she had gathered from our mother's charity. To my right were my two closest friends, Claire, a human rights attorney I'd known since sophomore year, and Marcus, an independent investigative journalist who had helped Ethan verify environmental data. I looked at each of them, then spoke slowly. I didn't ask you here to vent. I need witnesses. And I need the clarity of people not bound by blood, to see this for what it is. Claire nodded. Start when you're ready. I took a deep breath and pressed play. A faint hiss, then voices began to emerge. A secretly recorded conversation the night after the graduation party, in the hallway behind the hotel kitchen. My father's voice, urgent and harsh. We need to put an end to this, Valerie. She's in too deep. She's not like the others. She won't stop. Then my mother's voice, calm like she was discussing floral arrangements. I know. But killing Ethan wasn't a good idea. He had evidence. It's better to just shut him up for a few days. A light dose, enough to land him in the hospital. Serves as a warning. And shows her not to cross the line. What if that dose isn't enough? Raymond asked again. Valerie let out a cold laugh. Ariana isn't stupid. As long as she sees Ethan lying there, she'll back off. A faint clink. Maybe a wine glass. Then the recording cut off. No one spoke for several seconds. Only the sound of the wind seeping through the window filled the silence. Claire was the first to break it, her voice low and steady. This could be used as admissible evidence. But we'll need to verify the date and time of the recording, and if possible, secure another segment where Valerie or Raymond confirms it themselves. I nodded. I have timestamps and GPS data. It's automatically logged on the device. Marcus straightened in his chair, eyes sharp. It's possible they didn't actually intend to kill Ethan. But clearly someone else interfered with that plan. Either someone inside their circle or someone above them changed the dose. Not just possible, Madison spoke up, her voice still raspy as if her body hadn't fully recovered from the morning's panic. My mother called someone right after Ethan collapsed. I heard it. Just a few words, but she said, "That's not what I asked for. You went too far." Marcus turned to her. "Did you record it?" "No time." Madison lowered her head. "But the call log can be checked." Her phone would still have it saved. Claire fell silent for a moment, then turned to me. "This is dangerous, Ariana. You're not just facing your parents, you're facing an entire chain of power embedded at multiple levels. If you want to keep going, you'll need to prepare far more carefully." I nodded. "I didn't come to you out of anger. I came because Ethan still hasn't woken up. And because I believe if we don't act, someone else will end up like him." Marcus gave a slight nod. "One more thing. We need to identify the compound Valerie mentioned. Ethan didn't just faint, he's still in a deep coma. That means the substance was altered." I reached into my bag and pulled out a copy of the results from a private lab. I had secretly sent Ethan's blood sample for independent testing, because the official hospital report had clear signs of tampering. "This is the new analysis," I said, sliding the papers toward Claire. "Ethan's blood contains traces of a compound temporarily named MX43. It's a concentrated derivative of midazolam, but it's unregistered. It shows markers of prolonged neurological impact." Claire scanned the page, her face darkening. "This isn't a standard sedative. And it's certainly not something Valerie could casually call a safety measure." I looked around the table. "So, who changed the dose?" Madison's eyes met mine, her voice trembling. "It might be the person my mother called the supervisor." "The supervisor?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "She mentioned it once during a phone call I accidentally overheard. She said, 'We follow the supervisor's plan. Don't cross the line unless you're given permission.'" Claire lifted her gaze. "So there's someone above Valerie and Raymond?" I leaned back in my chair, my mind dragged another level deeper into the shadows. I had thought I was fighting my parents, two powerful, frightening people. But now I was beginning to realize, maybe they were just executors following orders from something even bigger. Something colder. And Ethan may have been the only one who ever brushed against the edge of that truth. That night after the meeting, I couldn't sleep. The words from the recording echoed endlessly in my head, especially my mother's hollow laugh when she spoke of Ethan as if he were nothing more than a lesson. I sat alone with my laptop, Ethan's black USB drive still plugged in. This time I didn't just search for files on pollution or toxins. I opened the entire finance directory. One folder labeled FACC caught my attention. Inside were spreadsheets listing account names, transaction dates, wire codes. I opened a file titled Alt Beneficiary Records. Rows of numbers flashed across the screen: withdrawals, transfers, donations. And then my blood ran cold. The listed beneficiary on at least 6 major transfers was Ariana L. Carter. I froze. I had never signed a single financial contract with Carter Ecotech. I had never opened any accounts beyond my 2 personal ones and 1 scholarship fund at Stanford. I scrolled down. Several accounts were registered in the Cayman Islands, the Bahamas, and Panama. Each moved millions of dollars. Every transfer carried notes like research funding, product development investment, or international conference expenses. Frantically, I searched the digital signatures. In a subfolder labeled Digital IDs, I opened a scanned grant contract, stamped with the Valerie Foundation, and bearing an electronic signature. My name. I zoomed in. The shock hit like a blade. The signature had been copied from another document. The ink stroke misaligned, the edges smudged, but the image intact. They had used a replica of my signature. I opened 3 more files. Each one had the same pasted signature, placed in the exact same spot. My hands slammed against the keyboard. I jumped up and dialed Madison. "I need to see you. Right now." About 30 minutes later, Madison arrived. She wore a gray sweater and old jeans, her hair tied back loosely. She looked exhausted but not surprised when I handed her the laptop. "How long have you known about this?" I asked bluntly. She stared at the screen, silent for a few seconds. Then she pulled out a chair and sat across from me. "About 8 months ago," she said. "Mom asked me to sign some documents so you could receive funding from the foundation. She said you were too stubborn, so she'd handle it her own way. You signed." My throat felt strangled. "At first, it was just internal paperwork," Madison whispered. "Then later there was a family meeting without you. Dad presented new accounts that needed a representative. They said if I signed it would be easier because you wouldn't cooperate. I thought it was just dummy accounts for tax purposes." I felt something in my chest splinter. I couldn't believe it. "Madison, you put my name on accounts." "I didn't think it was this serious." Madison broke down in tears. "I thought you'd never be dragged into it. That it was just a way to shield the company from auditors. Mom said it was routine accounting. I was stupid. I didn't realize they'd use it for laundering." I sank into my chair, forcing my voice to stay calm. "But why me? You were the chosen one. You were always the public face. Why not just use your name?" "Because you were the one who would leave," Madison said through tears. "They believed you'd never come back, never check, never notice. If investigators came, they'd brand you the traitor who embezzled funds. I was just the proxy. I was silent. I never took a cent from those accounts," Madison stammered. "But there was one time. I did accept a payment, $50,000. I used it to pay off my student loans and to buy back my image rights from the media firm Mom had hired." "You took laundered money and thought it would leave no trace?" She dropped her head. "I was going to confess to you after Ethan was poisoned. But I was terrified. I knew if an official investigation started, every document I signed would drag you down too." I turned away, walking to the window, my mind spinning into a storm. Madison, my sister, was not entirely a victim. But she wasn't the mastermind either. She had been manipulated, yet she still chose to go along, with her own interests in mind. I turned back, looking straight into her eyes. "You need to testify. All of it. What you did, what you knew, what you even suspected." "I will," Madison nodded, tears still streaming down her face. "But if I speak, they won't spare either of us." I stepped closer, taking her hand. "Then this time, don't let anyone else be the scapegoat." The next morning at dawn, I walked into the FBI headquarters carrying a black crossbody bag. Inside was everything Ethan and I had collected. A USB filled with environmental data, records of illegal accounts, a recording of my parents talking about the lesson meant for me, along with screenshots of bank transactions opened under my name. The agent who received me was named Michael Tran, a middle-aged Asian American man with sharp eyes and a calm, admirable demeanor. He showed neither suspicion nor easy sympathy. He only listened, asked questions at the right time, and took precise notes. I laid it all out, From Ethan's discovery of the toxin DMC-12, to Valerie's laundering of money under the guise of charity, to the bank accounts opened under my stolen identity. I left nothing out, even how Madison's signature had been exploited to authorize false documents. You realize that what you're providing could bring down a multi-billion-dollar corporation, don't you? Agent Tran finally said after a moment of silence. I do. And you're willing to stand as the primary witness? I looked straight at him. If I don't, then what did Ethan nearly die for? If I stay silent, what happens to the children who drank that poisoned water? He nodded slowly. We'll need to verify each piece, match them against the law. But if what you've given us is real, this is a major federal offense. I'll forward everything to the Special Investigative Unit for Environmental Crimes and Money Laundering. I walked out of the building with sweaty palms, but a weight lifted off my chest. Not because I believed everything would be resolved easily, but because the truth was no longer left alone in the shadows. 3 days later, Ethan woke up. I sat by his hospital bed in the recovery ward as pale sunlight filtered through the blinds. His hand stirred slightly, his eyes opened slowly, searching my face like he was trying to remember who I was. Then, faint but genuine, he smiled. I bent over, clasping his hand. It's me, Ariana. His eyes welled up. I thought, I wouldn't make it. I shook my head, my voice breaking. No one gets to take you from me. Ethan stayed quiet for a few seconds, then tried to push himself upright. I heard something, right before I blacked out. I leaned closer. What do you remember? I heard your mother's voice, he said, his throat hoarse. Clear as day, she said, give that vial to Miles. He knows how much to mix. I froze. Miles? My father's executive assistant? Ethan nodded. I don't remember everything after that, but I'm sure of the name. And her voice, it wasn't shaky. It was steady. Like, she'd done it before. I squeezed his hand tighter. The FBI already has everything. I turned in all the data. They're investigating. A few hours later, after Ethan was moved to a less intensive care room, I received a call from Agent Tran. His voice was firm, decisive. We've just executed a search warrant at Carter Ecotech headquarters. And at 2 branch offices in Texas and Colorado. I held my breath. We've seized all servers, accounting books, contracts, and internal surveillance. Within them, we found data that fully matched the USB you provided. The overseas accounts in your name were confirmed as fraudulent, opened with forged documents backed by company insiders. And Valerie, Raymond, I asked, my voice faltering. We arrested them both this morning at their residence. Valerie is showing initial cooperation, but their lawyers are already working to stall the proceedings. I stood motionless in the hospital corridor, one hand pressed against the glass wall, staring down at the parking lot where an ambulance had just pulled away. My parents, the people who had brought me into this world, the ones who once gave me my first birthday gift, who once picked me up from the bus stop after school, were now in handcuffs, indicted. Not for a single mistake, but for a deliberate chain of actions, calculated and sustained. I didn't cry. What I felt was silence. A kind of emptiness without a name. Maybe because deep down I had known for a long time, they were no longer my family. I just hadn't dared to face it until now. That afternoon I returned to Ethan's room. He was sleeping peacefully. Madison had arrived too, carrying a bag of food I hadn't had the time to prepare. We sat together in quiet for a while. Then Madison spoke. I saw it. What? The news. About Mom and Dad being arrested. Everyone's in chaos. I exhaled slowly. There's going to be more. The press, the shareholders, the victims. Madison's eyes reddened as she looked at me. What if they deny everything? What if they try to pin it all on you? I gave her a faint smile. Then I'll do the one thing they never taught me. I'll tell the truth. And let it protect itself. Beside me, Ethan stirred slightly. Outside the window, rain began to fall. But I felt calm. Not because everything was over, but because I knew I had finally chosen the right side. Ethan's side. The side of truth. The courtroom that morning was packed. Cold white fluorescent light beamed down on the old wooden benches where reporters, government staff, and several residents from the polluted communities sat in heavy silence. I sat in the front row beside my attorney. Ethan was behind me, the white bandage still on his arm from the 4. He had insisted on being present at the hearing. Valerie sat at the defendant's table, the sleeves of her blazer slightly wrinkled, her face still carefully made up but her eyes weary. Raymond sat beside her, his expression almost blank. He didn't look at me nor at anyone else. Both were represented by a team of renowned lawyers, but even so, the air in the courtroom was thick with a sense of concealed guilt. The judge was Irene Barks, a black woman in her early 60s, well known for her uncompromising stance on crimes involving the environment and public health. When she entered, everyone immediately rose. She nodded once, her voice steady and resonant. The hearing of the State of California versus Raymond Carter and Valerie Carter is now in session. The prosecution presented first. The evidence I had submitted was shown to the court. Data on banned chemicals, internal reports, the recording about the plan to warn Ethan, and most of all, Madison's testimony. Madison appeared in a pale gray dress without makeup, her eyes nervous but resolute. She stepped onto the witness stand, raised her hand to swear in, then spoke in a trembling but clear voice. I admit I once signed my name on illegal financial documents, but I was threatened. I accepted money. I was wrong. But I stand here to tell the truth, to restore at least a piece of dignity for those who have been deceived all these years. She glanced at me as she finished that last sentence. I gave her a small nod. While forgiveness between us was still far away, at least we were no longer enemies. When it came time for the defense, Valerie abruptly shifted strategy. She stood, asking to speak in place of her lawyer. I was not the mastermind, she said, clutching her note sheet tightly, her voice breaking. Everything I did was to protect the family, to protect the name my husband spent his life building. Raymond was the one running things. I only followed. I looked at her, no longer with anger but with emptiness. Even in the face of justice, my mother still chose to push blame onto someone else. Raymond was different. He said nothing. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, he simply shook his head. A slow, heavy shake, as though he already knew what was coming. Then it was my turn. I walked up, my hand trembling slightly as I held the folded sheet I had kept in my coat pocket. Looking around the room, I drew a deep breath and began to read. My name is Ariana Carter. I do not stand here as the daughter of the defendants. I stand here as someone who nearly lost the person she loved to something called power and control. Ethan, the man who almost died from a chemical no one should ever be forced to endure, was only one small piece of the devastating picture Carter Ecotech created. They didn't just poison the man I love. They poisoned the trust of communities who had already borne too much suffering. The people living beside contaminated water lines don't have names on news headlines. They are the children in the black neighborhoods of South San Jose, the single mothers in Bakersfield, the people with no voice to fight back. I paused for a moment, my voice caught in my throat. And when those people collapsed, they were forced to believe it was their fault. Not the fault of those sitting in air-conditioned offices, wearing suits, drinking purified bottled water imported for them alone. I lifted my head. Today, I don't ask for a harsh sentence. I ask for justice. And more than that, I ask for an end to a cycle that should never have existed. As I returned to my seat, Ethan squeezed my hand firmly. I heard the judge exhale softly before beginning her ruling. Raymond Carter, you are sentenced to 25 years in prison for aggravated environmental pollution, concealment of fatal medical risks, and federal tax evasion. You will not be eligible for parole for the first 15 years. Raymond lowered his head. No protest. Valerie Carter, the judge continued. You are sentenced to 18 years in prison for complicity, laundering money through charitable foundations, and endangering public health. As a condition, you will participate in mandatory community rehabilitation and environmental education programs throughout your sentence. I watched my parents handcuffed, not out of hatred but because I needed to witness the closing of an era. Justice, something so many had dismissed as vague or unreachable, stood before me real. As they were let out, I did not turn away. I watched until their figures disappeared behind the steel door. And in that moment, for the first time after years of control, torment, and denial, I felt freedom, something no one could ever buy or manipulate. 1 year after that trial, my life had changed completely. Not because I gained fame or applause from society, but because for the first time, every step I took came from my own convictions, no longer dictated by invisible expectations or family orders. Ethan and I moved to Sacramento, close to communities once harmed by Carter Ecotech's pollution. We rented a small house near a Latino neighborhood, a home with a backyard full of eucalyptus trees and a wide wooden porch where afternoon sunlight spilled gently across the glass panes. It was there that I founded TrueRevenge, a nonprofit dedicated to monitoring groundwater quality, publishing open data, providing low-cost biological filters, and partnering with local groups to expose polluters in real time. It wasn't just about testing water, it was about delivering truth. And we vowed never to let any power bury it again. Ethan, with his environmental chemistry expertise and technical skills, became TrueRevenge's chief technology officer. He spent hours each week designing and refining water sensors that could be installed in household wells, connecting to an app so families could monitor lead, pesticides, or chlorine levels in their water daily. I still remember the day Ethan pulled me over to his desk holding a new chip, his eyes shining like a child assembling his first model spaceship. "Just plug this into the main pipe and they can track their drinking water safety every single day," he said, then turned to me, his voice softer. "Ari, you didn't just save me. You saved the way I see life." I smiled, saying nothing. But inside I knew I wouldn't have made it this far without him. As for Carter Ecotech, after Raymond and Valerie began their sentences, the new board invited me to rejoin as the rightful heir. I sat silently in the room where so many of my father's secret meetings had once taken place, listening as they presented asset valuations, reputation recovery plans, and proposals for me to assume the role of new chairwoman. I asked only one question: "Are you willing to give all profits from the next 3 years back to the communities you harmed?" They laughed, thinking I was joking. I wasn't. I pulled an envelope from my bag, placing it on the table. Inside was a legal document renouncing all inheritance, transferring every share I was entitled to into an independent public trust, run not by me, but by a council of environmental experts and community representatives. I left the boardroom, stepping outside into the morning sunlight of May. A breeze carried the scent of orange blossoms from nearby gardens. I didn't feel loss, only a lightness, as though I wasn't trapped between should and must. 1 year later, on an early autumn morning, I stood on stage at a major conference in Denver, the city where I once grew up, once ran away from, and once thought I would never return to. The hall held over 500 people: students, teachers, engineers, activists, and residents from Texas, Mississippi, Arizona, places where toxic water had once ruled their daily lives. I wore a simple deep blue suit, nothing elaborate. Ethan sat in the front row, beside Madison, who had chosen to start anew as a communications consultant for another nonprofit advocating for charitable financial transparency. She was no longer the type of celebrity she once was. But I saw my sister truly listening to others without needing to be the center. I held the microphone, standing before hundreds of watching eyes, took a deep breath and spoke. "My name is Ariana Carter. But that name is no longer the legacy of a family. It is a reminder of responsibility." The room was silent. I once believed that uncovering the truth alone would set you free. But the truth doesn't always do that. Sometimes truth makes you lonely. It makes you lose family, lose a place to belong. It forces you to face the darkness inside yourself. I paused, meeting Ethan's gaze. But that same truth gives you the power to choose. To choose the life you really want. To choose the future you deserve. And to remind you that no one else gets to decide what is enough for you. I looked down at the front row where a little girl no more than 10 sat clutching a water bottle tight in her hands, her mother holding her close. TrueRevenge is not here to hand out solutions. It is here to create possibilities. For you to protect yourselves, to verify the facts, and to raise your voices. Something I never had, but something you can have starting today. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. But it was real, not from power, not from pity. From people who knew that once you've found your true voice, no one can silence you again. My story ends here, but I know each of you listening may feel it in your own way. Maybe you've been hurt by your own family, forced to stand on the line between truth and loyalty. Maybe you've been silenced, simply because you were the only one brave enough to face what was wrong. I truly want to hear your thoughts. What do you think about my choice? About forgiveness, about loss, or about how someone can use their own pain to do good for others? Leave your reflections below. Because who knows, your story might give strength to someone out there standing at the crossroads the way I once did. And if you love stories that are deep, emotional, and real, about family, betrayal, and the journey of finding yourself, don't forget to follow the channel. The next stories will bring you not only moments of reflection, but also a chance to look again at our own lives, with all their hidden corners, their scars, and the hope that never fades.